All right, guys, thanks so much for holding and waiting here on Morning Line. Let's get to the calls right now. We have, hey, Tom, I believe that's you. What's your question? Hey, Tom, good morning. You there?
Good morning. How you doing? Turn TV down.
Thank you for calling. What's your question?
Well, I'm sitting here looking at the United States constitutional law on the rights to bear arms and not to be infringed upon.
Is there anything specific you'd
And
like?
what I'm looking at here, I'm looking, you know, if we take the guns away from people here in the United States, we will become a communist country. Because you have the rights not to protect yourself if you don't have a gun. And I'm skeptical about that because I like to hunt. And that's how I put food on my table, by hunting. I am a convicted felon. And I have the right to carry a black powder pistol. I have the right to have a black powder shotgun. And I have a right to own a black powder rifle.
All right, Tom, thank you for...
I'm listening. I'm trying to say, look at this book here. I won't try to get to it. But no, I feel like if you're a convicted felon and you not have no felon charges concerning a gun, and what I'm trying to say is, you know, if people is not using guns, and that's like the carry law, I don't agree with that carry law, people carrying them on their hips and stuff all over the place, because that causes a lot of problems. Like you say, going into bars, and, you know, people see that gun, they get intimidated with it. Well, you know, they get scared of people, so then now you got gunplay with each other. So I think people really needs to back up on that gun carry law a little bit. They should have their guns in their homes, not out here unless it's hunting season. And I think people should be able to protect themselves no matter who they are or what they are. And this mental problem they have, they can consider that as if you're taking a nerve pill or any kind of anxiety pill or anything like that, you know, that can keep you from owning a gun.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Tom, for that comment. And I'm sure there are people out there that share the same sentiment.
Oh, there are. You have people, like we said earlier when we started, that have no affinity or desire to own a gun. You have people that think it's great to have them for hunting, but that's about the only legitimate purpose. You have people that want them for sports, shooting, and recreation. You have people that want them to carry them for self-defense. And that's a growing percentage of the population in Tennessee. You know, the last time I looked at numbers, we've got about 6.7 million residents in the state. That's everybody from newborn babies to, you know, people in nursing homes.
Yeah. Correct. He mentioned he's a convicted felon, very open, and the ability to carry specific guns? Or have?
I don't know his specific facts, but I can tell you that the Tennessee legislature has unfortunately made an absolute mess of that issue. So on a felony conviction, this is under 3917-1307 is the statute, because it's really critical for people who have his situation to understand. They define 3 different classes of felons. They have violent felons, they have felony drug offenders, so someone who didn't have any violence, any element of violence at all, but they were drug dealers basically. And then they have nonviolent felons, and that could be someone who does something as relatively harmless as writing a bad check over $500.
Fraud.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So there's no element of violence there with those people at all. And the legislature says the violent felons, basically, there's only one way they could ever get their ability to get a gun back, according to the legislature. That's to get an expungement or a pardon coupled with perhaps a restoration order. For a felony drug offender, there's maybe 1 or 2 other paths that are available. And then on the nonviolent felons, they got a couple options where they could regain the ability to, they'd still be a felon potentially, but they got a couple of options where they could regain the ability. Now, the thing that Tom mentioned, and a lot of people who have felony convictions say this, and they're wrong in Tennessee, is under federal law, a black powder weapon is classified as an antique firearm because it was it was either made prior to 1899 or it's a replica of a gun made prior to that date. But federal law is clear. Muzzle loaders are classified as antiques, and felons can own them. Federal law says they're not even a firearm. That's why you can mail order those. You don't have to go somewhere to a dealer and fill out a form and have a background check. You literally, call Bass Pro and they'll mail it to you. The problem is Tennessee defines a firearm differently, and it doesn't have that antique exception. So Tennessee law says a black powder weapon is a firearm, and if you can't own a regular firearm, you can't own a black powder weapon in Tennessee. Now, part of the problem and confusion, and there's a lot of it, is about a decade ago, the state attorney general put down an opinion that is exactly what Tom said. I got a felony conviction, but I can own black powder weapons. Tennessee attorney general, that opinion is out there. Then in 2015, a different state attorney general, the one we currently have, wrote another opinion that is completely in disagreement with that. And that's the problem of our legislature is just mucked up this law so bad that it's hard for the average person to know what they can and can't do.
Understand. In your words, a mess.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, David, thanks for calling. Thanks for waiting. Well, what's your question?
What if a person has not paid the extortion fee called an expungement order and it was a rush to judgment? Do they still have the right to own a firearm, even though if they walked into a gun shop, they would be denied? If they previously owned one, they would be denied if they took it to a pawn shop. And here recently, News Channel 5 proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Bar Association members, the prosecution, and the judges will immediately expunge the records for some people, but not if you wear a crucifix around your neck. Thank you.
That gets into a very technical area because state and federal law talk in terms of purchasing and possessing, but not ownership. So you could have, and it's not uncommon to have someone that can't possess a firearm because of a felony conviction that could still own it. So ownership and possession are separate concepts. So I'm going to assume he's talking about possession. And Tennessee does have a system that if you are a first offender, if you committed certain low-grade crimes, sort of like first bite at the apple, that if you do your sentence, you pay your court costs, you pay your restitution, you do whatever the court's ordered, that they will basically erase that conviction. And it goes away from the public record. And when that happens, someone's ability to own a firearm or possess a firearm, if it was taken away by that conviction, just automatically restores. Those expungement proceedings aren't typically very expensive. You're going to spend, if you get an attorney's help, $1,000 or so. If the state challenges it, you may spend a lot more than that. But, it's not free. And the fact is, if you don't get that expungement, then that criminal conviction still attaches, and you commit a felony offense in Tennessee if you possess the gun, even if you're eligible for the expungement.
So much information to unpack.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, David, thanks for calling. What's your question? Hey, David, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead. What's your question?
Question is this. I'm a veteran, Vietnam veteran, Marine Corps, and I've had this problem with, they said I've got 70% PTSD. Can I still buy a rifle or anything like that?
The PTSD issue with veterans is a huge issue, not just in Tennessee, but across the nation. And the reason is because the law basically says if you have a mental health impairment, if you have a mental health condition, something bad enough to, for example, to receive Social Security benefits or any VA benefits based upon mental health status, that you are prohibited from owning a firearm. Now, part of the problem is that mental health is a broad, expanding, and varying category that's subject to a lot of personal interpretation. And here's what happens. The law basically uses the phrase a mental health diagnosis, but it doesn't differentiate between someone who's a sociopath or a violent mental health person versus someone who maybe has severe depression because their spouse just died. Some of those mental health issues you never get over, and they do have connections with violent patterns of conduct. Some, like depression, may be long-lasting, but there's no violence element to it. And the law doesn't differentiate. Both of them would be equally prohibited if a mental health professional diagnoses them as being mentally subject to a mental health diagnosis. And so the one thing we see with PTSD, particularly in law enforcement and military, is if it's a mental health diagnosis by a trained mental health professional, it's still mental health. It doesn't matter at all that it's violent or non-violent. It's a mental health, it's a determination, and therefore it's a prohibiting classification in terms of ownership.
It goes back to your other answer in regards to the convicted felons.
Right.
There are different classifications.
Very much so.
All right, let's go now to Peter. Hey, Peter, you there?
Oh, yeah.
Hey,
I have a question for your guest. My concern is about the future of the Second Amendment in this country. There seems to be a strong political divide between liberals and conservatives. And for a while I lived in a state that in one of the big eastern states where almost nobody had guns, but there was a lot of gun violence up there. And here in Tennessee, it's pretty easy to get a gun, but there seems to be much less violence. But my problem, the question I have is, the liberal states push for doing away with the Second Amendment. They're constantly arguing that the amendment says an armed militia, and they really want to do away with private ownership of guns, and they seem to be gaining strength in this country. And I just want your opinion. Thank God for the South, but it seems to me that the future is not very bright for the Second Amendment. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it's, all things are political, and I think that's pretty much what's going on here. Thank you.
Well, he makes a good point. And I like the commentary that all things are political, but I'd go beyond that, and I would say that a large component of this debate is not just the political, but it's the education systems that the kids are filtering through before they reach the age of political awareness. So if you look back, for example, in the 40s and 50s, it wasn't uncommon to have ROTC, where students had guns on campuses. Mm-hmm. It wasn't uncommon to have kids with shotgun racks in the back of their trucks that they drove to school because they were going rabbit hunting after school. It wasn't uncommon to have scholastic shooting teams where they shot 22s or whatever, just like they would play football. And then we've gone through sort of an era where increasingly the liberals, or whatever you want to classify them as, have been in control of the education systems. And so when I went to school, high school here in Nashville, guns weren't necessarily evil. I mean, I can remember kids showing up, at Halloween on dress-up day and literally having an empty real gun in the holster they wore to school. And nobody thought anything of it. And now, you have a Pop-Tart that looks like a gun, you may get expelled. We're seeing a return of things like scholastic shooting, mainly in the shotgun sports in schools. But it is an uphill battle to get school administrators to allow that because of the political correctness element. So one thing we're seeing, for example, is because of this education component, is discussion taking place among some legislators of requiring schools to teach firearms safety, firearms awareness, firearms availability and training in the school system, just like you have driver training, sex ed, mm-hmm. and some of these other things. Because I think part of the problem we see is not just the adult liberals. They don't become 25 years old and suddenly they're anti-gun. I think they're getting that in the school system and it's just manifesting itself.
John, I do want to talk to you about another hotly debated issue, and that's the bump stocks.
Right.
We can't avoid that conversation. So we'll take some more of the calls, and we'll talk about that conversation coming up after the break.